Hello everyone. We'll be starting with our second session for the day. So, our next session is from Hyderabad chapter. We have Nidhi Kohli from Cognizant. She is a principal analyst, agile transformation coach. She's been in the industry for more than a decade. So she is going to speak about the topic modern IT projects accelerating their success with agile operating models. Before she starts her session, let me thanks Agile Network India founding sponsor Innovation Roots. Innovation Roots is a leading consulting and training service provider helping organizations to achieve business agility and beyond. It is one of the leaders and pioneers of niche publishing services and well known for content collaboration with global thought leaders, authors, and creators. For more information, I request you all to visit Innovation Roots website www.innovationroots.com. Do's and don'ts, you join the event 5 minutes before the start time. Use high quality speakers and or headphones. For better sound quality, keep your microphones muted and video disabled as this may cause disturbance and bandwidth issue. Use questions, post your questions at the chat in the chat box. Facilitators or moderators will help you to read it for the speakers as per the time availability. Please fill your feedback form post event, which will be helpful for us which will give us idea about what type of events, how to improvise the event from the event management perspective. We appreciate your cooperation. With this, I will take this privilege to invite Nidhi. Nidhi, I request you to come on the camera. Over to you.
Thank you, Prashant. Thank you for this opportunity. And good morning, everybody, for joining in. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I am playing the role of an agile transformation coach, and I have been in the industry for more than 2 decades. I take this as an opportunity to share some of my experiences working on some of the projects that have been evolving in the industry today. So, a couple of years back, when I started my agile journey way back in 2010, the nature of projects then versus the nature of projects now, there is a huge difference. While agile as an approach or agile with its values and principles, I'm very proud to say that they still continue to hold good, even with the changing landscape of different IT projects. Okay, so I would be speaking mostly around the experiences that I have had, and I look forward to questions from the audience. And if there are any comments, any thoughts, happy to learn along with you. Okay, so my topic is modern IT projects accelerating their success with the agile operating models. So this is what I intend to cover in the next 30-35 minutes. The rest of the time, we will try to take up some questions and have a healthy conversation. So the two types of projects that I would like to touch on, while there are various flavors of modern IT projects today, but these are the two types that I would like to touch upon based on my experience. The first one is about cloud migration. Yeah, so this project was all about migrating on-prem applications and data to cloud. And the second one is about legacy to COTs. Yeah, migrating from proprietary systems that organizations have to a SaaS system. Yeah, and I will focus a lot around the first project, wherein I will speak about the approach for migration that was envisioned and that was basically taken forward, the agile operating model that we had come up with, the learnings that we went through, some of the measurements that we did that helped us as a indicator of where we are headed to. Yeah, and there were some benefits and challenges that came by because we adopted this model, but certainly at the end of the day there were quite a bouquet of learnings. Yeah, and those bouquet of learnings have helped us as a team as well as me as an individual to be able to take those forward. Yeah. Okay, So this is a little brief about the cloud migration project that I was involved in. So the story begins with one of the very large insurance companies, wherein they decide that there should be one line of business which needs to be spun off to another smaller organization, which means the larger organization is now getting portion of it moving out, and thereby it was very important that the applications, the IT infra that was needed to support that business, yeah, that is uh, actually moved out of the purview of the parent company. And it was decided that this transition needs to happen in a very short period of just 18 months. Okay. Now, if we consider the, I would say, the drivers for that business, it was all IT backbone. Yeah. Now, transitioning IT backbone into a new setup altogether, and by the way, this project is a couple of years old. Yes, it is not as new as as yesterday. It is a couple of years old, but the learnings are still as fresh, or learnings are as applicable as they were then. So the IT backbone had to be moved out. That was the ask. Okay. Now, how do you do that? One, we set it up like a traditional way on-prem, come up with a with a maybe infra and then build it up. The second, which was preferred and which is what the organization also wanted, was move on to one of the cloud providers, and they preferred AWS. And the idea was that the entire IT backbone for that line of business, which was transitioning out, will move to AWS cloud. But we will go ahead with the same line of business, because there was no option, at least to start with. The new team that was getting formed, they preferred not to consider an option of really revamping the business model itself. No, it was just a spinning off first. So thereby, the same applications that were working originally had to work in the same way in the new setup as well. So it was a prerogative of that organization that we just move it out, but let the applications be as they were. So then it was decided that there would be overall nearly 50 applications, yeah, out of which 21 had to be migrated to cloud, which means they had to be just moved out of the parent company. And there were 16 applications which had to continue to be used by the parent organization, but they also were equally important for this new organization. So there was a strategy formulated wherein we will be doing the cloning, sort of duplication, but it was more like there won't be any handshaking, there won't be any, I would say, uh, interfaces between them, but there would be a lot of data that will be common across them, and there would be a lot of functionalities that will be common across these applications. So that's where a cloning strategy had to be defined for that. They were it was expected that there would be code changes in applications, databases, informatica, jobs, and all, but that was only from the perspective of setting it up in a new infrastructure. But there was no expectation of functionality change of any of these applications. So this was what the premise was for this particular project. And considering it to be very, very straightforward, wherein there's no change in functionality, we are just taking applications from one source to another, which is the target. So the strategy that was adopted for remediation was rehost or lift and shift. Yeah. So what was it that we that the team had thought through was to move all the applications from on-premise to cloud and modify the underlying architecture. Yeah, alter infra configuration only of the application by way of using automated or manual tools. And eventually, we were able to get in a lot more automated tools than we originally started out with. Now, with this as the backdrop, I would like to just explain a little bit more around the scope of the work. As I said, uh, this is the usual, I would say, steps that you would take before any project is decided on to be migrated to cloud. Yeah? So it usually starts with an assessment exercise, and you need to do a present, and basically you need to come up with a proof of concept, basically to prove that it is possible to migrate some of the applications, some of the systems to cloud. Yeah? So this was an exercise that the client had taken up uh, much before we got in, and that's where they decided on the vendor and the cloud vendor, and that's where they rolled out the RFP, and we had won it. So after this exercise was done, it became very, very clear that the applications that I was referring to, it will be possible for them to be moved to cloud. Now, once we got into the project, the activities that were expected to be done was application remediation readiness, which is about analyzing the applications in much more depth and coming up with basically a migration strategy as to how do you migrate it from the current setup to the cloud. How will you remediate? Remediate here means how will you uh, take the same applications working as is with change in the IT backbone. Yeah, so that is called remediation. Yeah? Or it is in lot of projects is also known as tech currency. Yeah? You're trying to make the technology as current as possible. Yeah? So when you think of remediating, it is not as easy as just taking it from one place to another. I mean, all of us work in IT industry, so we know that it is not that straightforward. So this exercise had to be taken in after due analysis and due diligence had been put in. So the second step, data and application remediation and migration, is the I would say the main work that had to be done. And after that, it was verification and then release. Release as in the application continued to be used on-prem, and then one day, when when it was clear that everything has now been uh, cloned or copied, or in simple terms, there is another system that has stood up, which is exactly the same as it was in the parent company's on-prem setup. Yeah, that when it was taken a call that it is all set is when there was a switch that happened. That is, you moved the users automatically from on-prem to cloud. For a user, it was very interesting that just didn't make any difference because neither the UX had changed, nor the functionalities, nor the behavior. Yeah, so it was for them, it was just business as usual. It was like yet another day for them. But for the project team, it was like they had just switched the complete backbone from what was existing to a new technology, basically to the cloud. Yeah? So that was what was the outcome expected after the verification and release. And then the next steps when we take up these kind of migration projects are you try to leverage the cloud and you try to see if there is a possibility to optimize cost savings and if there is something more that you can do. So that's where you transition now to see possibilities of uh, including a lot of native cloud features and native cloud capabilities. Okay. So, what was the approach that we took for cloud migration? Yeah. So, in very simple terms, if you see, this is the source, and then we have the target system. Yeah. For as I said, for the user, it was business as usual. They did not feel any difference, and that was actually the success criteria. They should not feel any difference in using the applications which have now migrated to cloud. Yeah? So, to be able to achieve this goal, we had a long drawn planning exercise. So kickoff and then discovery and the release planning. Now, all of this was to ensure that we get started with the right kind of applications to start with, and we have a proper strategy in place to do the releases. Yeah, and it was not a release that started happening every 2 weeks or every 2 months. The initial release actually happened if I remember it right, it actually happened after 4 to 6 months. 4 to 6 months is what it took for the first release to happen. And after that, the release cycles actually were much shorter because we had hit basically they say you have already hit the road and you really understand the road. Now you know how do you actually start moving forward and you start accelerating on it. So what were the activities that were done to ensure that this happens? is we, as I said, we had the kickoff wherein team was onboarded and we tried to understand all the requirements and dependencies, and who were the key stakeholders. They had to be understood. They have to be brought in. The discovery phase was very, very critical. So in this, the main activities that had to be done was about assessing, yeah, identify application configurations, assess database related changes. And by the way, it was again not the not the configuration of databases. It is about how do you take that existing configuration into a new setup. Yeah, so that was what it was, and then of course come up with a test strategy and identify dependencies with vendors and all. And then we got into the release planning, wherein we decided that we will actually do it in groups. Yeah, so we brought in logical applications together, which had close dependencies, and we moved all of them together into a release. And before actually moving them, I mean, before actually releasing them, we developed the work in an iterative way. We adopted the Scrum model. Uh, it had to be customized, so I will speak about that a little bit more. But thing is, we were able to successfully use good agile frameworks. But once the I would say once the uh, applications were all ready, that's where we had to do a complete round of testing. So regression, integration kind of testing had to be done holistically for those releases. So that's where we started using the term called move groups. So this is a common term wherein these many applications will be part of the group, and since they are moving together, so thereby the term move group. Now that testing phase had to be taken up as a separate phase. Yeah. So now how do you do that? So we adopted Kanban there. And while visualization of Kanban approach was taken to the maximum advantage, it was also about showing up all the issues that we're facing and showing up all the blockers visually using Jira as a tool that enabled the teams not just to prioritize but also to see what is the impact if the defects keep holding all of us here on the board, which was actually a reflection of what happens when the defects are not really moving the way they are expected to. So that is where the Kanban approach really helped us. Okay. Now, these were the activities, as I said. So planning was about identifying the move groups, but when we moved into the actual changes, remediation and migration, these were the activities that had to be done. So data migration, validation, yeah, and then application stand up on client, AWS cloud, and all of that. Yeah. Then validation, as I said, was all on Kanban. Now, with this as the approach, what was the agile operating model? Yeah, so this is what we envisioned and we followed through for that project. So the way we start reading this is we have something called as a dependency backlog. So considering the fact that this project is all about lift and shift, there are a couple of external entities also playing a role here. So one of them certainly the cloud provider. Then we have the infra providers, basically the technology providers of the existing system. Say a lot of work was on Oracle. Now Oracle is a system which which the team was working on. So we had to move things out, and we had challenges wherein Oracle had to help us. Similarly, there were some challenges with other systems as well. So point is that it was not as straightforward. It was not as straightforward as you give me the requirement, I will do it, and I will give it back to you. It was not as straightforward. While as the core team who was doing the remediation migration, we know exactly what we have to do. There are external entities that are playing a major role, and because we are completely dependent on them and we have no control over them, highly possible that they are going to if they don't meet the timelines, we get derailed. Yeah, so that's where this dependency backlog and the concept of managing dependencies played a very important role. So the idea was that wherever we identify dependencies, like in a forum of scrums, we also have a forum wherein we are just sorting out these dependencies. uh, yeah, I will come to the questions. Yeah, I'm seeing the pop-up. Sorry, I will come to the questions. Just give me some time. Maybe I will be able to answer a lot of them while I'm explaining as well. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so as I said, dependency management was critical. So thereby, uh, lot of inputs that were going into the program backlog, which meant that when we have decided on the move group, which is figuring out on the program backlog if there is a dependency that is being managed via the dependency backlog, and there is inputs coming in from the dependency backlog into the program backlog. Now, the way we read it is dependency backlog is the first one, then your program backlog, then program backlog becomes a single source of truth for all the pods or squads or HPT, whatever you may call it, as in the high performing teams who are basically owning each of these move groups. They start taking in the requirements. Now, while their backlog is ready, which is what will feed into the sprints that they start deciding on, which means the backlog is taking all of their inputs, and because it is a single source of truth, the program backlog, they ensure that whatever comes in into the pod backlog is completely sorted, and the team can actually smoothly move forward on whatever they commit for that short period of 2 weeks sprint. Yeah. And then I spoke about the release planning, kickoff, and all, so which is sprint zero and release planning. Then you get started with your sprints. While you are doing sprint planning and you have visibility for one sprint and at best the next sprint, we also envision that it is good to look at we basically adopted this concept of program increment from SAFe. Yeah, so let's have visibility of at least 3 sprints. Yeah, and we may not have a release at the end of every 3 sprints, but having a visibility and thereby clarity on what is coming for the next 3 sprints lets us stay focused on near future and flag out, if there are any concerns that may come by for the work that is planned for the near future sprints. Yeah. So that is what we try to do using this program increment approach. Yeah. And by the way, as I said, it is just concept adopted from SAFe, but we did not go complete SAFe because of the challenges, and having a release every program increment the way it is recommended by SAFe was not possible in this kind of a scenario. And another thing that I would like to draw your attention to is, if you notice, uh, the remediation migration phase did not start on a specific day and end on a specific day. Yeah, for separate move groups, it actually had a different time frame. So that is where the representation, say for move group 1, if we took maybe say 10 sprints, maybe for move group 2, we actually took maybe say 12 or 13 sprints. And that was absolutely fine because they were like parallel projects going together with very less dependencies between them, which means very less dependency across the pods, excepting of course if they are using the same infra, say for example, if they are using the same technology. And even the pre-prod prod was also different. So the releases of each move group need not be aligned. So it shouldn't be like on 30th of June all of these things are going. No, it was like if 30th of June move group 1 moved, the other move group was not very far away. Maybe by the next month itself, the next move group was also ready. Yeah. So now, if you notice, there are some very unique traits of this project which do not allow us taking in all the standard concepts of, say for example, SAFe. But if you notice, there is a possibility to plan for a short duration of 2 weeks. Yeah. And if you're able to plan, then why not take in the ceremonies that Scrum talks about and take advantage of them? So that's where we try to adopt quite a few of them, like for example grooming, the sprint planning, retrospective demos, and all. And of course scrum of scrums to ensure that there is a synchronization between the pods, the working the working squads. Yeah. And they ensure if there are dependencies across them, that get sorted, which is what scrum of scrum really helps. Now, considering this as the operating model, was everything hunky dory? Yeah. So this is how the predictability was. So we started by saying we will have 30 story points. but we actually achieved only 4. Yeah, and that too, first 2 iteration was the settling time, more like release planning and figuring out how do we do it and all. We started out with the third sprint, third iteration actually. And first iteration, this is the huge gap we see. So the percentage of sprint goals met was only 13%. Then we moved to 41, then we moved to 63. So if you notice, we were, uh, I mean, not doing very great while we adopted Scrum. Yeah, but then what were the challenges which was leading us to this? Yeah, so some of them I've tried to list. So we had this infra issues, we had put in the dependency backlog in place, but then there were times wherein a lot of infra issues started showing up when the development had started. And there were problems of access, which you would not face when you are actually doing a standard enhancement project, for example. So you have this access issue resolved right from day one. You have your dev environment, yeah, and you have your other environment set up. And when you do your work, it is like this is a house where here we have settled in, and we are going to continue to work. That's how it is in a smaller, in a standard development or an enhancement project. But here, this is a migration project. So while you could have sorted out the base access issues, like for example, access to cloud and access to the base applications, the 16, 17 applications, say for example, the ones that we had to be migrated, but these applications had downstream, upstream dependencies. And being external entities, like we were the service providers, we did not know where else we needed access. So that was an interesting, I would say, challenge that kept coming, and it was there for a long time actually. Yeah, we had problems with the DB, DB access. Again, that calls for some, I would say, some uh, DB access sometimes is not as straightforward, and sometimes you need to do some setups. There also we had some issues. Yeah. And interestingly, while it was lift and shift, so thereby no functionality changes, it's more like you are just repackaging it to work on cloud. They turned out to be, some of the application turned out to be much more complicated with regards to even just moving them. Yeah. So then there were also some downstream, upstream interface related issues and all. So my point is, these concerns that are listed, you would normally not see in a standard development project. And those were the ones that basically held us back in our predictability. But then why did we still continue with this model? The very fact that it kept bringing out that there is a possibility that we can be better. So we started out with just 13%, we moved to 41%, and we just touched 63%. And that was actually an achievement considering all of these challenges. Yeah. Now, what were some of the benefits when we adopted this? As I said, uh, defining chasing short-term goals. Yeah, that was what the team was kept on toes with. Yeah, they are bringing out all the challenges, and they were brought out much early and much often, and very very often. Yeah, the team did not wait till the end of the sprint to call out, you know what, this sprint we are not meeting the sprint goal because of XYZ reason. No, they were calling it out, but at the back of their mind, they always knew that there is a short term goal that they were chasing. So that laser sharp focus was something that we observed coming by. And while it had started out with the team, it actually went to the clients as well. And we started seeing their involvement and support from them, even though it was a short term 2 4 weeks that we were looking at. Their focus also started coming in with regards to helping the team chase these goals. Yeah. Uh, Early testing brings up defects, we know it, but these defects were not treated as defects to be fixed later or something. These defects were to help us plan to the extent possible better for the next sprint, and also ensure that we don't repeat these concerns and these issues. Yeah. Dependencies, yeah, upstream, downstream dependencies, if they were called out considering the scope, if they were not getting considering the scope for 2 weeks, if they were not getting fixed in those 2 weeks, there was always a possibility there is that another 2 weeks time box coming, there is another 2 week time box coming. Yeah. So the team, while they remain laser sharp on the short term goal, they knew that if something is not getting fixed, we will have to keep it alive, we have to keep the lights on, and we have to keep showing that we are not progressing as much as we think we can. Yeah. And as I said, the client also started getting much more involved. Yeah. And because of that, we started seeing a lot of support coming in from them. And because they were the drivers, they were also able to influence a lot of these external entities, the vendors, uh, over and above us, who could help us accelerate our progress. And of course, increase team collaboration and focus on release goals as we progressed on iterations. So these were some of the benefits that we observed in this program. But as I was saying, there were lots of challenges. Yeah. But at the end of the day, this iterative incremental way of working really brought out a lot of insights. Yeah. And these challenges actually told us that there is a possibility to do something better and better and better. So there was no option of we waiting for 2 3 months and then coming up with say POC or with a deliverable for the team to move on. No, it was that was never an option. It was always this short time frames which encouraged everybody to be on the toes. Yeah, but still, what were some of the challenges? Yeah, so the first one, if you notice, it is about dependencies. Yeah, dependencies that started showing up after an iteration start. So in a standard agile implementation, in a mature agile implementation, you would actually question, how is it that you set a sprint goal when you hadn't done enough analysis? How is it that you committed to a sprint goal when there was this definition of ready that was not met? Well, the definition of ready was met. It is just that when we got down to working is when the dependencies started showing up. And in this nature of work, there is a high possibility of coming across these surprises. There were access issues, yeah, as I said, for missed databases for upstream, downstream, and that actually blocked quite a few stories. Yeah, there were gap between the way the analysis was done before we started the migration versus when the developer actually started getting down to laying those bricks and building up that building, building up that wall for construction. Yeah, so there there is always been a case wherein whatever analysis we do to get started, there is always something that has been missed, and especially in this kind of work, it always shows up. Then another interesting aspect is when you get started, yeah, so we say collaborate, understand the functionality, understand the users wants, and that's where the concept of user stories, right, look at from a user's point of view. Here, because it is just about lift and shift, understanding the functionality of the application was not an expectation. Because it was not an expectation, naturally no time was set aside for the development team to actually understand beyond, of course, a little introduction of what these applications are all about. I mean, of course, that they always knew, but going deep into why these functionalities, that was neither was an expectation nor there was any time, due to which when they actually did the lift and shift, there were concerns raised on why the functionality is not behaving right, and which was caught in the validation phase. And it when the RCA was done, it went back pointing that, well, we never understood the functionality. Now that is another, I would say, limitation with which the team gets started and with these kind of projects. Yeah, so developers, technical team may not have functional understanding, and hence defects show up later, but then still it is okay because still finally it is lift and shift. So how do you mitigate this is you start involving technical folks, technical as in the guys who are uh, functionally capable. Yeah, you start involving them while the work is still in the test environment, and we started with the UAT to start with, and then we moved them to the we started involving them when we were still in the test environment. And frequent releases can be risky considering the dependencies across applications. Hence, while the development can follow sprint time boxes, a thorough regression is needed. Yeah. So while we took the advantage of that iterative incremental approach, while the remediation migration was happening, uh, it turned out to be sort of hybrid because we had to do that thorough round of testing for the last, I think, 2 months or so before the releases. But then, because of this iterative incremental approach, the biggest advantage that came by was there was hardly any slippage on the commitment. Issues were found, things were in red, but they were read right from early days. And thereby they started getting sorted out, and there was hardly any slippage. And there was, I remember, there was one release that had to be moved 1 month away, and that was not because we were not ready, we were actually ready. It was moved out because there was a dependent system which was getting upgraded. And the client decided that let's go for this release only after the upgrade is done and we take in all the changes from that upgrade. Okay. So, so these were some of the, I would say, benefits and challenges of adopting Agile in this kind of a project. Okay. Okay. So the next one, this I will just touch on very, very briefly. Yeah. So this is somewhere in between, taking in all the learnings that we had from this cloud migration project. There are lot many similarities when we move from legacy to COTs. Yeah, so COTs as in commercially off the shelf SaaS solutions that are currently available, and lot of clients across domains, by the way, they are moving to these models, taking the advantage of the fact that they don't have to, in very simple terms, buy a car and then live with that car for the next 10 years. And when you decide that I have to buy another car is when you go for the latest model. So COTs these days are offering these opportunities of getting upgraded and actually getting to know, getting to explore a lot more that is happening in the industry while you are sitting on that SaaS platform. Yeah. So in this example, or I would say in this situation, there is a large pharma company that has scattered and complex medical systems. Yeah, the client wants a unified and a simple system landscape because they know that there is too many complexities. They would rather focus on their core, which is about improving experience of patients, investigators, and their employees, rather than live with this complicated network of systems that they have actually built over, I think, more than 2 decades or so. Now, there are 56 applications that they decided across 4 business tracks that have to be moved to this integrated platform. Some of them will be moved, but there are 30 other applications which cannot be moved to the SaaS platform. So there is a roadmap there was a roadmap that was being discussed to figure out how to do that. Yeah. The software provider, which is the SaaS provider, is required to configure and design the products, while system integrator, and we, Cognizant is a system integrator in this case, are required to support the integration, migration, organizational change management, user training, and overall validation. So basically, the overall program management, in very simple terms, has to be done by this system integrator. And the software provider brings in industry best practices, and hence some applications business rules will be required to be overhauled. Now, what is the strategy adopted is there would be new solutions from one software provider, and existing business processes will need to align with what the industry has to offer as best practices. So it is not that this pharma company will only live with what their four walls is, but they are also ready to explore what's happening in that pharma industry itself. Now, considering this as the nature of the project, this is an operating model. Now, this is much more aligned to SAFe. Yeah, so we have the business process engineering coming in, which is in the requirement side. If I just explain this. Okay. Yeah. So we have this requirements prod, which is about business process engineering, who in turn are giving in feed to the SaaS platform provider. And while the development from the system integrator standpoint is integration and migration work, so this will be done in these rhythms of sprints. Yeah, we are thinking this project has just started. Yeah, so we are thinking that we will go the program increment. Yes, it is pretty complex. Yes, program increment way, but we will have to see how it works. So to understand this diagram in a very simple way, we start with this business process engineering here. This gives an input for the integration and migration activity, as well as input to this SaaS provider. SaaS provider are not going to get too much influence by what is coming in, because this business process engineering team is only going to talk about what is currently happening in the system, and they may or may not align with what this company is already doing. They may want to bring in some best practices. Yeah. So this is eventually going to lead us to say deliveries wherein we would like to do the hypercare, or the basically the production support work in a Kanban way. Yeah. And we will try to explore the possibilities of system demos as we progress on this. Certainly, testing again will have to be taken up separately, and it will be done the way I was explaining in that cloud migration project. It will be taken up as one piece of work that will last for some time, few weeks to maybe a few months. So this is all that I had to offer. We can move on to Q&A. Any questions, any comments? Maybe.
Thank you, Nidhi. Thank
Thank
you for sharing your experience.
you. Are there any questions from the
Yeah,
audience?
uh, just a minute. So there was one question from Archie Goel, sir.
Yeah,
So he was asking definition of a two sprints, content or application. Uh, so Archie sir, can you just elaborate on this part?
Yeah, the question is related to my understanding in agile mode is that you release the sprint, and do after the release the user should be able to use it. Then during that time you are working with the next sprint or next release. So how in your assignment of migration, how you
yeah,
define what should be the content of first sprint and the next sprint? That is the question. Thank you.
exactly. Sure. Thank you for that question. So, in our scenario, as you would have understood, it was just not possible to have a release even after few sprints. I mean, having a release every sprint was impossible, considering this is about lift and shift of a set of applications. And from an end user standpoint, it is the same system. There's no change in functionality. So the way we defined the sprints was which applications can be considered for remediation and migration, and make them validation ready. It was not about making them release ready or making them user ready. It was about making them validation ready. That was the, I would say, definition of done that we try to respect when we call this out in a sprint model.
I hope that answered Archie sir's question. So Didi, I have one question from my side. As you are
Yes,
explaining
please.
about the multiple sprints
Yeah,
with multiple teams,
yeah,
uh, if I didn't hear wrong, you mentioned about they had a different duration of sprint, or how is it? They were having the
okay,
same, and how did you sync up? And if they are of different duration of sprint, how did the
yeah,
cadence? How did you help them to have a cadence in release or something?
right. So I was actually saying the duration of the sprint was the same. They were aligned to that. The
Mm-hmm.
duration of the remediation migration phase was different for each move group, which
Okay.
means some teams completed their move group activities in, say, 10 sprints, in some took maybe 12, 13, 15 sprints. So what I
Mm-hmm.
was saying is that remediation migration phase for each of those move groups, which was basically a grouping of different applications, was different. So some move groups started out validation early on and some started a little later. That was what I was trying to say. But when all of them were in the remediation migration phase, they were aligned to the same dates. That is where it was possible to have Scrum of Scrum and reap the benefits of it, because they were able to talk through what are the dependencies. And fortunately, there weren't many dependencies across move groups, because the grouping was done in such a manner that the applications which were closely knit, they were brought in together.
Yeah. Okay. So we have one more question from Amar.
Yeah.
He is asking, what are the challenges of migration to SaaS and PAAS? What
Yeah,
challenges you faced?
yeah. So SaaS, as I was saying, is software as a service, right? So
Yeah.
today, SaaS gives us lots of benefits, but at the same time, they are pretty standard. So it is like you cannot afford too many, I would say, customizations uh, with a SaaS offering. So thereby, while you may dictate some business process rules, you would hit a roadblock on getting them implemented because the SaaS provider, they are agnostic of which company they are working for, and because of that there is an advantage. They bring in the best practices of the industry in there. Yeah. So biggest challenge is, I would say, the mindset of a client to be able to accept the fact that there is a much more democratic environment available to basically take advantage of, rather than keep harping on, okay, this is our business process, this is what we want, and you better change it, because then you're actually diluting the advantages of the SaaS and the PaaS providers.
I, in fact, absolutely. I was about to ask you actually about that. Actually, being such a complicated thing, and
Yeah,
there was so much client intervention.
yeah,
Uh, how difficult was it to, or how did you manage those clients? In fact,
yeah,
when you aligned with when you wanted to transform to agile ways,
yeah,
and what was
yeah.
their thought process?
Oh yes. So when we actually proposed that we would like to do it in agile, the first statement that we heard, was, you do anything, you give me everything by June, by whatever the date, do whatever you want to do. I don't need to comment on your processes or on your approaches. So that's where we started the conversation. Then after a while, when we started talking a lot, this is the challenge, this is a problem, we are not able to resolve these dependencies, is when they realized that these guys are now running. And that's where we started seeing them getting more involved. Otherwise, the clients were very set because, see, this is a new company that was spinning off. So they had resource challenges. There was just a handful of people. From IT side, there were not even 5 people. So how will 5 people support a large transformation like this, right? So they were very clear that it is up to you. You will have to respect these dates only. But we started seeing that they started getting involved because of the way we started calling out all the challenges that we were facing, and that's when we said the iterative approach has helped us. And that's where I said that even with a very very different kind of the flavors that I talked of, they are very different kind of IT projects these days, but the same standard agile values and principles apply here, and they are going to reap in, and they continue to reap in the same benefits that we were seeing maybe 2 decades back.
Absolutely. So Amar also says the same thing. Clients just want outcomes, but
Yeah,
afterwards, I think how well we collaborate, how fast we collaborate, that actually helps us actually to deliver as per their expectations.
yes.
Also, Prashant Gulwadi makes a statement. Thank you for sharing your experience, Nidhi. It reminded me of my experience of VSAM to DB2 migration, Y2K conversion years ago.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yes,
Thank
absolutely.
you very much, Nidhi. Thanks for your valuable time. On behalf of Agile Network India, I would like to thank you for sharing your experience.
Sure.
And guys, if you have any one question, we have 1 more minute to go. If you would like to have a question, you can put it. So before closing, any three important things you'd like to convey, Nidhi, on behalf of like on the transformation of service side, because most of
Yeah,
the India is towards service side, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. When Cognizant is a service provider, absolutely.
Right.
So the first thing is, uh, when we start the conversation with the client, as I said, na, they are least bothered. What do you want to do? Agile,
Mm,
iterative, anything. Do
mm,
whatever you want.
mm,
The point is that we as a team need to answer. And if there is a transformation coach, like when I step in, I can't come with some theory and start talking. I have to learn. So I usually start my journey by understanding and knowing where the team is, why they are doing what they are doing, and then figuring out how will we approach it. So pushing hard on some new processes when the team is already neck deep in a lot of work just doesn't fly. It is about aligning with what they are doing and helping them out. with that attitude, a lot of customizations that we have done has been because we realize these are going to work only when they are customized, not the way they are proposed. So it is about the first one I would say is understand what the landscape is, and then bring in the new processes. The second one is if there is resistance, which will be because finally you're proposing a new process, and there are teams who maybe they are resistant to doing too many things in agile way because it brings out a lot of vulnerability, and you show up as though you are you do not know. You have too many faults in you, right? Agile is all about that, right? So there will be a lot of resistance. Just live on, be with the team. Don't let them, and don't let yourself walk away, because you're a change agent there for them. And when you live on with them, be with them for some time, you'll be surprised the way they start coming back and telling you, oh, you know what, agile means this for us. And the third thing is let the team be. I mean, you're a coach for some time. When the transformation has kick started, uh, let the team move on and support them only when needed. Not be there showing your presence as though you are the only one there guiding. No, they are already on their own. So the session that happened just a minute back, just before the session, wherein the speaker was talking about Shuhari, absolutely so dot on there. Shuha and Re, they are in Re, let them be on their own. This is what has been
Absolutely.
my experience. Thank you.
Absolutely. So this is that take our client into confidence and build a trust and then collaborate in a better way and give a space for the team also to explore themselves and take decisions, enable them,
Absolutely.
right?
Enable.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Nidhi. Thanks for a session on behalf
Thank
of Agile Network India community. Hope to collaborate more in future
you. Sure.
and
Look forward, Kashan.